Hi viewers, hope you are fine. I still remember the way my father looked at me that morning. Like I was something broken. Something embarrassing. Something he wished nobody could see. The dining table was filled with expensive silver plates, polished glasses, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the giant mansion that had never truly felt like home to me. My younger brother Daniel sat beside my father in his perfect suit, smiling confidently while my mother adjusted his tie like he was some kind of prince. And then there was me. Quiet, invisible, forgotten. You're late again, Elena, my father said coldly without even looking up from his newspaper. I tightened my fingers around my bag. I was working late. He laughed softly, not proudly, mockingly. Working, he repeated, at that tiny bookstore? That's not work. That's hiding from reality. Daniel smirked beside him. You should just admit you failed, he added casually while sipping coffee. My mother stayed silent. She always stayed silent, and somehow, that silence hurt the most. I stood there trying to breathe normally while my chest slowly tightened. Moments like this had become normal in our family. Every breakfast felt like a courtroom where I was already guilty before saying a single word. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I was always the disappointment, the failure, the weak daughter, the one my father regretted having. Daniel closed another property deal yesterday, my father announced proudly. At his age, I already owned half this city. But at least one of my children inherited my brain. I lowered my eyes. I knew better than to respond. Because whenever I defended myself, things only became worse. But what my family never understood was this: I wasn't weak. I was exhausted. Exhausted from spending my entire life trying to earn love that was never meant for me. And deep down, I think they enjoyed watching me struggle. Especially my father. Richard Vaughn was one of the most powerful real estate businessmen in the city. Cold, brilliant, respected, feared, people called him a genius. But behind closed doors, he was a man who measured human worth by success and money. And I had neither. At least, that's what everyone believed, including me, until everything changed, until one single name written on one forgotten document destroyed every lie my family had built around me. But that truth was still far away. Back then, I was just trying to survive another humiliating morning. Dad, Daniel said proudly, the investors confirmed dinner tonight. Excellent, my father replied. That's how winners build empires. Then his eyes slowly turned toward me. And failures work in bookstores. The table burst into soft laughter. Even my mother smiled awkwardly. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like glass breaking underwater. I forced a smile and grabbed my coat. I should go. Of course, my father replied. Wouldn't want to keep your little books waiting. As I walked toward the door, Daniel suddenly called after me. Oh, Elena? I stopped. You should try reading books about success sometime. More laughter. I left without responding, because if I had stayed 1 second longer, I would have cried. Outside, cold rain covered the streets of Manhattan while people rushed past me holding umbrellas and expensive briefcases. The city looked alive, but I felt empty. I walked 3 blocks before finally stopping near a small coffee shop. My hands trembled as I sat down beside the window. Then I finally let myself cry. Not because of what they said, but because a small part of me still hoped one day they would love me. And that hope was killing me. I stared at my reflection in the glass. 28 years old, tired eyes, simple clothes, a woman constantly apologizing for existing. Sometimes I wondered if my father had always hated me, or if I simply reminded him too much of someone else. My grandmother used to say I had my grandfather's heart. Maybe that was the problem. Because my grandfather had been the only person in that family who truly cared about me. Arthur Vaughn, the founder of the Vaughn estate empire. The man everyone respected. The man my father desperately tried to become. And unlike my father, my grandfather believed kindness mattered more than power. He used to tell me stories in the mansion library while everyone else ignored me downstairs. Elena, he would whisper, never let cruel people decide your worth. I missed him every day. After he passed away 3 years earlier, the mansion became colder than ever. And somehow, my father became even crueler. I wiped my tears quickly before entering the bookstore where I worked. Tiny Bell's bookstore wasn't impressive, but it felt peaceful, safe. The owner, Mrs. Carter, smiled warmly as soon as I entered. "There's my favorite employee." I smiled weakly. "Morning." She looked at my face carefully. "Bad morning again?" I nodded quietly. Mrs. Carter sighed. "One day they'll regret treating you this way." I almost laughed. "No," I whispered. "People like my family never regret anything." But I was wrong. By the end of this story, regret would destroy every single one of them. The bookstore remained quiet most of the afternoon. I organized shelves, recommended novels to customers, and tried forgetting the heaviness in my chest. Around 4 o'clock, an elderly man entered wearing a dark coat and carrying an umbrella. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Harrison, my grandfather's former lawyer. He looked surprised to see me. I smiled politely. "Hello, Mr. Harrison." His expression changed slightly, almost concerned. "I've been trying to contact your family." My stomach tightened. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There's going to be a formal estate review tomorrow morning." I blinked in confusion. "Estate review?" "Yes. Your grandfather left several sealed documents before his passing. Some legal conditions delayed their release." I frowned. My father never mentioned this. "What kind of documents?" Mr. Harrison studied me carefully. "I honestly thought your father told you." Something about his tone made my chest feel strange. "He didn't." Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable. "Well, perhaps it's better if you hear everything tomorrow." "Mr. Harrison," he interrupted softly. "Just be there, Elena." Then he handed me a small white envelope. The moment I saw the golden seal on the front, my heart stopped. Arthur Vaughn, my grandfather's signature. My hands trembled as I opened it carefully. Inside was a short handwritten note. Only one sentence. For the child they underestimated the most. I stared at the words in silence. Confused, shaken, afraid. "What does this mean?" I whispered, but Mr. Harrison only replied quietly, "Tomorrow changes everything." Then he walked away, and for the first time in years, I felt something dangerous growing inside me. Not fear, not sadness, hope. That night, the mansion was louder than usual. Expensive guests filled the dining hall while crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across marble floors. Investors, politicians, wealthy businessmen, all gathered around my father like he was royalty. Meanwhile, I sat quietly near the far end of the table, completely ignored. Exactly where my family preferred me. Daniel stood confidently beside my father giving presentations about future real estate projects. Everyone praised him, applauded him, admired him, but then one investor suddenly asked, "Mr. Vaughn, who inherits the main estate someday?" My father smiled proudly. "My son, of course." Daniel grinned instantly. "And my daughter?" My father continued while glancing toward me dismissively. "Well, Elena was never interested in business." That wasn't true. I had been interested once. Years ago, before they convinced me I would never be good enough. Before every mistake became proof I was worthless. The investor looked at me politely. "And what do you do, Miss Vaughn?" I swallowed quietly. "I work at a bookstore." The table went silent for 2 painful seconds. Then came the awkward smiles. The judgment, the pity. "Oh," the investor replied slowly. My father laughed. "She prefers fiction over ambition." More laughter filled the room. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe anymore. I stood up quickly. "Excuse me." Before anyone could stop me, I walked out toward the balcony overlooking the city skyline. Cold wind hit my face immediately. I held the railing tightly, trying not to cry again. But then I heard footsteps behind me. My mother. She approached slowly. "Elena." I didn't turn around. She sighed softly. "You know how your father is." I laughed bitterly. "That's your excuse after 28 years? Silence. Then she whispered, "You should try harder to make him proud." That sentence shattered something inside me completely. I turned toward her slowly. "Try harder?" My voice trembled. "I spent my entire life begging this family to love me." My mother looked away guiltily. "But it's never enough," I continued. "Because none of you ever wanted me to succeed." "That's not true." "Really?" I asked painfully. "Then why does everyone in this house look at me like I'm a mistake?" She had no answer. Because deep down, she knew I was right. I walked away before she could speak again. Upstairs in my bedroom, I locked the door and opened my grandfather's note once more. For the child they underestimated the most. What did he mean? Why did it feel like a warning? Or maybe, a promise? I barely slept that night. Because somewhere deep inside me, I knew tomorrow would change my life forever. I just didn't know how much. The next morning, rain poured heavily across the city. Black luxury cars lined the courthouse entrance while reporters crowded outside behind security barriers. I stared at the giant building nervously. Why would an estate review happen here? And why did my father look furious the moment he saw me arrive? "You came?" he snapped. "You never told me not to." His jaw tightened. "This meeting doesn't concern you." Before I could respond, Mr. Harrison approached us calmly. "It concerns her more than anyone else." The silence that followed felt deadly. My father stared at him sharply. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses. "You'll find out shortly." Something dark crossed my father's face. For the first time in years, he looked nervous. And suddenly, so was I. Because I had no idea that within the next hour, my family's entire empire would begin collapsing. And my name would silence the entire courtroom. The courtroom felt colder than winter. Not because of the weather outside, but because every person inside that room was carrying secrets. Heavy ones. The polished wooden walls reflected the pale morning light while quiet whispers moved between lawyers and assistants. Expensive watches glimmered. Papers shuffled softly. My father stood near the front row beside Daniel, both wearing dark tailored suits that made them look powerful and untouchable. And then there was me. Still feeling like I didn't belong there. Still trying to understand why my grandfather's lawyer insisted I attend. I sat quietly near the back while people glanced toward me with curiosity. Some recognized me. Most ignored me. That was normal. In the Vaughn family, I had always been background noise. But what I didn't know then was that every person in that courtroom would soon remember my name forever. Mr. Harrison stepped toward the center table and opened a thick black folder carefully. The room slowly fell silent. My father crossed his arms impatiently. "Can we begin already?" he said sharply. "I have meetings this afternoon." Mr. Harrison looked at him calmly. "This will not take long, Mr. Vaughn." Then his eyes briefly met mine. And something about that look made my stomach twist nervously. The judge nodded. "You may proceed." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Today we are here regarding the final sealed directives left by the late Arthur Vaughn concerning ownership transfers, inheritance adjustments, and legal conditions tied to the Vaughn estate." The moment my grandfather's name echoed through the courtroom, a strange ache filled my chest. I missed him terribly. Sometimes it still didn't feel real that he was gone. My father leaned back confidently. He looked relaxed, almost arrogant, as if he already knew exactly how everything would end. Daniel looked even worse, smiling, certain, entitled. I lowered my eyes quietly. I already knew my place in this family story. Daniel inherited success. I inherited disappointment. At least, that's what I believed. Until Mr. Harrison opened the second document. The first directive concerns distribution of company shares. My father smirked slightly. As expected, Mr. Harrison continued. 40% of Arthur Vaughn's remaining company shares transfer to Richard Vaughn. My father nodded proudly. 20% transfer to Daniel Vaughn. Daniel smiled immediately. And then, silence. Mr. Harrison adjusted the page slowly. The remaining 40%. My father barely looked interested anymore. Probably assuming some charity organization would receive the rest. But then Mr. Harrison spoke again. Belongs to Elena Vaughn. Everything stopped. Every sound, every breath, every movement inside that courtroom disappeared instantly. I blinked slowly, certain I heard wrong. Daniel's smile vanished. My father stared forward without moving. "What?" he whispered. Mr. Harrison repeated himself calmly. 40% ownership transfers directly to Elena Vaughn under Arthur Vaughn's final directive. The courtroom exploded into whispers. I felt frozen in my chair. This couldn't be real. There had to be some mistake. My father suddenly stood up violently. "That's impossible." His voice echoed across the room. "There's clearly an error." Mr. Harrison remained calm. "There is no error." My hands trembled uncontrollably. I couldn't even process what was happening. 40%? My grandfather left me 40% of the company? Why? Why would he do that? Daniel leaned toward my father angrily. This is ridiculous. My father's face darkened. She knows nothing about business. His words hit me sharply even then. Even after hearing life-changing news. His first instinct was still humiliation. Still cruelty. Still rejection. Mr. Harrison calmly lifted another document. There is more. The room immediately quieted again. And suddenly, I felt terrified. Because if this wasn't the biggest surprise, then what came next? Mr. Harrison continued reading. Under Article 7 of Arthur Vaughn's final estate declaration. Ownership of the primary Vaughn residence. My father smirked confidently again. The mansion. Of course he would receive the mansion. That place mattered more to him than family itself. Transfers entirely to Elena Vaughn. The silence that followed felt unreal. Then chaos erupted. No. My father slammed both hands onto the table. No. The judge immediately warned him to calm down, but he barely listened. Daniel looked completely pale. My mother covered her mouth in shock. Meanwhile, I couldn't breathe. The mansion? The entire mansion? The place worth millions? The home my father worshipped like a kingdom? My grandfather left it to me? Why? None of this made sense. Absolutely none of it. This is fraud, my father snapped furiously. She manipulated him. The words pierced through me painfully. Because even now, he could not imagine I was worthy of being chosen. Mr. Harrison's expression hardened slightly. Arthur Vaughn personally prepared these documents with 3 witnesses present. My father pointed toward me furiously. She's an imposter. The room froze instantly. And suddenly, everything became much worse. My heart dropped, because the anger in my father's eyes no longer looked embarrassed. It looked dangerous. She spent years pretending to care about him, he continued coldly. She manipulated an old man near the end of his life. That's enough, Mr. Harrison warned. No, my father snapped. I won't allow this humiliation. I sat there silently while every eye in the courtroom turned toward me. Some looked shocked, others suspicious, and for one horrible moment, I felt 12 years old again. Small, weak, ashamed, exactly how my family trained me to feel. Daniel suddenly stood too. She doesn't deserve any of this. I looked toward him slowly. My little brother. The child I defended for years. The one I comforted after nightmares when we were younger. The boy who used to hold my hand crossing streets. Gone. Replaced by someone greedy and cruel. She abandoned this family years ago, he continued bitterly. Grandfather barely saw her. That was a lie. And everyone in that room knew it. I visited my grandfather almost every week before he died. I read books to him. Brought him tea. Sat with him for hours while my father obsessed over meetings and business deals. But suddenly, a memory hit me hard. 3 years earlier, the hospital room, my grandfather weakly holding my hand. Elena, he whispered softly, promise me something. I smiled through tears. Anything, when the time comes. His voice trembled slightly. Do not let them destroy you. At the time, I thought he meant emotionally. Now I realized, he meant financially. Legally, personally, he knew exactly who they were. And he knew exactly what they would do after his death. My father interrupted my thoughts furiously. I challenged the validity of every document. Mr. Harrison nodded calmly. You may do so. However, he opened another file. There is recorded evidence. My father froze. Mr. Harrison pressed a button on a small recorder. Static filled the courtroom briefly. Then, my grandfather's voice. Weak, old, but unmistakable. If this recording is being played. My chest tightened instantly. Then I am gone. The room remained completely silent. I am fully aware of my decisions, my grandfather continued. And I leave the Vaughn residence and 40% of my holdings to my granddaughter Elena willingly. I felt tears filling my eyes. Hearing his voice again nearly broke me. But then his tone changed slightly. More serious. If my son attempts to challenge these decisions. My father's face slowly drained of color. Then release the secondary records. Mr. Harrison calmly stopped the recording. And suddenly, the courtroom felt dangerous again. My father looked terrified for the first time in my life. Not angry, terrified. What secondary records? He asked quietly. Mr. Harrison looked directly at him. The ones Arthur Vaughn ordered us to protect until today. My father immediately stepped forward. You can't release confidential material publicly. Oh, Mr. Harrison replied calmly. But we can. Daniel looked confused. What records? Mr. Harrison opened another folder slowly. The documents proving misuse of company funds over the last 8 years. The room exploded again. My father's face turned white instantly. My stomach dropped. What did that mean? There must be some misunderstanding, my mother whispered nervously. But Mr. Harrison kept reading. Multiple offshore accounts connected to unauthorized transfers totaling several $1,000,000. Daniel stared at my father in shock, but my father said nothing. And suddenly, I realized something horrifying. My grandfather knew. He knew everything. Every hidden lie, every secret transfer, every betrayal inside the company. And somehow, he trusted me more than his own son. The judge requested a brief recess as lawyers began arguing loudly. People whispered everywhere. Reporters outside the courtroom doors suddenly became louder. The Vaughn empire, perfect from the outside, was cracking open publicly. And standing at the center of the collapse was me. I slowly stood up, still shaking emotionally. I needed air. I walked into the hallway alone while reporters tried asking questions from behind security barriers. Elena, did you know about the inheritance? Miss Vaughn, are the fraud allegations true? How do you respond to your father's accusations? I ignored them all, because honestly, I didn't even know who I was anymore. A few hours earlier I had been a forgotten bookstore employee. Now suddenly I owned part of a corporate empire and the family mansion. Nothing felt real. I reached the far end of the hallway and leaned against the wall trying to breathe. Then I heard footsteps behind me. My father. I immediately stiffened. The look in his eyes terrified me. Not because he looked emotional. Because he looked cold. Completely cold. You think you won? He asked quietly. I swallowed hard. I didn't ask for any of this. That's the problem, he snapped bitterly. Weak people always inherit what stronger people build. His words hurt, but not the way they once would have. Because for the first time, I saw him clearly, not as a powerful father. Not as someone whose approval defined me. Just a bitter man losing control. You never loved me, I whispered quietly. Something flickered in his eyes. Briefly, almost guilt, but it vanished immediately. You were never capable of handling this family. I looked at him painfully. No, I replied softly. You just never allowed me to try. Silence. Heavy silence. Then he leaned closer. You should refuse the inheritance. I stared at him in disbelief. If you care about this family at all, he continued coldly, you'll sign everything back to me. There it was. Not apology. Not love. Not regret. Control. Always control. I felt something shift inside me completely then. Years of fear. Years of begging. Years of emotional starvation. All turning slowly into strength. And for the first time in my entire life, I looked my father directly in the eyes without fear. No. His expression hardened instantly. You don't understand what you're doing. I think I finally do. He stepped closer angrily. That mansion belongs to this family. I shook my head slowly. No, I whispered. According to grandfather, it belongs to me. The silence between us felt deadly. Then he smiled suddenly. A cold, terrifying smile. You really believe this ends well for you? My heart trembled slightly, but I refused to back down. Because something inside me had finally awakened. And it wasn't weakness anymore. It was truth, and truth frightened my father more than anything else. As he walked away, I suddenly realized something terrifying. This was no longer just an inheritance battle. This was war, and my own family was preparing to destroy me. War inside a family doesn't begin with screaming. It begins with silence. Cold silence. The kind that slowly poisons every room. And after that courtroom hearing, the Vaughn mansion became exactly that. Poisoned. Every hallway felt heavier. Every dinner felt staged. Every conversation sounded fake. Even the staff avoided eye contact with me now, uncertain whether I was still the unwanted daughter or the new owner of the house. Because legally, everything had changed. But emotionally, nothing had. My father still looked at me like I was an intruder. Daniel avoided me completely. And my mother, She walked around the mansion nervously like she was afraid the walls themselves were listening. 3 days after the hearing, official papers arrived confirming the transfer. The mansion, the shares, everything. I sat alone in the library reading the documents repeatedly, still struggling to believe any of it was real. Then my eyes landed on my grandfather's signature again. And suddenly I missed him so much that breathing hurt. Because now I understood why he did this. He wasn't rewarding me. He was protecting me. Protecting me from the people who had spent years convincing me I was worthless. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I looked up. My mother stood near the doorway quietly. Elena, her voice sounded smaller than usual. Tired. I closed the file slowly. What is it? She stepped inside carefully. I wanted to talk. I almost laughed bitterly. My family had ignored my feelings for years. Now suddenly everyone wanted conversations. She sat across from me nervously. You know your father is under pressure. I stared at her silently. There are investigations now, she continued softly. Reporters keep calling. Investors are worried. I lowered my eyes briefly. Part of me should have felt satisfied. After everything they did, after years of humiliation, this should have felt like revenge. But honestly, it mostly felt sad, because no daughter dreams about watching her family collapse. Even when they deserve it. You could stop all this, my mother whispered carefully. I looked up slowly. There it is. She frowned slightly. You didn't come here because you finally care about me, I said quietly. You came because you're scared. Her eyes filled with guilt immediately. Elena, you want me to save him. She stayed silent, and silence was answer enough. I stood up slowly and walked toward the giant window overlooking the estate gardens. When I was 13, I whispered softly, Dad forgot my birthday. My mother looked surprised. I continued quietly. I waited downstairs for hours holding the cake I baked myself. Pain tightened in my chest instantly. But he never came home. She lowered her eyes. And when he finally remembered 3 days later, my voice cracked slightly. He blamed me for being emotional. The library remained completely silent. I turned toward her slowly. You were there. Tears gathered in her eyes. I know. No, I whispered painfully. You watched it happen. My mother finally broke down crying softly. And for the first time in my life, I realized something important. She wasn't evil, just weak. Too weak to protect me. Too weak to stand against my father. And weakness inside a family can wound people just as deeply as cruelty. I loved you, she whispered through tears. I looked at her quietly. Then why did I spend my entire life feeling unloved? She had no answer, because there wasn't one. That night, I walked through the mansion alone after everyone went to sleep. The giant halls echoed softly beneath my footsteps while old family portraits stared down from the walls. Most of them showed smiling faces. Perfect faces. But now I knew the truth hidden behind every photograph. Power. Control. Pride. The Vaughn family wasn't built on love. It was built on fear. And fear was finally destroying them from the inside. I entered my grandfather's old office slowly. The room still smelled faintly like old books and cedar wood. His desk remained untouched since his death. I sat down carefully and opened the top drawer. Inside rested dozens of letters tied together neatly. My name was written on the front. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. Elena, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally reached you. And if your father is angry, then I was right about him. Tears immediately filled my eyes. I continued reading. You remind me of myself more than anyone else in this family. That is why they underestimate you. Kind people are often mistaken for weak people. But kindness requires more strength than cruelty ever will. I pressed my hand against my mouth trying not to cry. Because for the first time in years, I felt seen. Truly seen. The letter continued. Your father believes power makes a person valuable. But power without compassion destroys everything it touches. Including family. I closed my eyes painfully. Every word felt true. Every single word. Then I reached the final paragraph. One day you will have to decide whether to become like them. Or become better. That choice will define who you truly are. I sat there for a long time staring silently at the paper. Because suddenly, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about identity. Who did I want to become after all this pain? The next morning changed everything again. I woke up to shouting downstairs. Loud shouting. Angry shouting. I rushed toward the main hall and froze instantly. Federal investigators stood near the entrance speaking with lawyers while reporters crowded outside the gates. Daniel paced nervously. My mother looked terrified. And my father looked furious. The lead investigator approached him calmly. Mr. Vaughn, we have authorization to seize financial records connected to the Vaughn Development Group. This is harassment, my father snapped. The investigator remained emotionless. We also have evidence of illegal property acquisitions and offshore laundering activity. My stomach dropped. This was worse than I imagined. Much worse. Daniel suddenly looked toward his father in disbelief. Dad, tell me this isn't true. But my father stayed silent. And that silence shattered Daniel completely. Because for the first time, he realized the man he worshipped wasn't powerful. He was corrupt. The investigators moved through the mansion collecting files and computers while reporters filmed everything outside. The Vaughn empire was collapsing publicly. And suddenly, everyone who once mocked me looked terrified instead. By afternoon, the news channels exploded with headlines. Real estate tycoon under investigation. Vaughn empire faces fraud allegations. Secret records expose financial misconduct. The same people who once admired my father now avoided him completely. Because power is lonely once money disappears. That evening, Daniel knocked on my bedroom door quietly. I almost didn't recognize him. His confidence was gone. Completely gone. I need to talk to you. I nodded slowly. He stepped inside awkwardly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then finally, I didn't know. His voice sounded broken. I looked at him carefully. About what? The money, the fraud, the lies. I believed him. Because Daniel had always been desperate for our father's approval too. The difference was, he actually received it. At least temporarily. I'm sorry, he whispered suddenly. I froze. He looked down ashamed. For everything. The room became painfully quiet. I spent years treating you terribly because Dad taught me that being successful mattered more than being kind. His eyes filled with tears. And I believed him. Hearing those words hurt more than insults ever did. Because deep down, I knew it was true. Our father poisoned all of us differently. Daniel wiped his face quickly. You didn't deserve any of it. For years I imagined this moment. An apology, recognition, justice. But strangely, it didn't feel victorious. Just sad. Because broken families don't magically heal with apologies. The damage remains, even after truth arrives. A week later, formal charges were announced publicly against my father for financial crimes connected to company operations. The board removed him immediately. Investors disappeared. Friends vanished. Business partners abandoned him overnight. The powerful man who once controlled entire rooms now sat alone in silence. And somehow, that image hurt me most of all. Not because he didn't deserve consequences, but because pride had destroyed him long before the law ever did. The final confrontation happened late one evening. I found my father sitting alone in the dark library staring at the city skyline. For the first time in my life, he looked old, not powerful, not terrifying, just tired. You came to watch everything fall apart? He asked quietly. I stood near the doorway silently. No, he laughed bitterly. You should hate me. Maybe he expected screaming, anger, revenge, but honestly, I was too emotionally exhausted for hatred anymore. I spent years trying to understand why you never loved me, I whispered softly. He stayed silent. Then finally, because you reminded me of my father. I frowned slightly. He loved you more than he ever loved me. The pain in his voice surprised me. He respected kindness, my father continued bitterly. And I spent my whole life believing kindness made people weak. Suddenly everything made sense. His cruelty, his obsession with success, his need for control. He wasn't trying to become powerful. He was trying to become worthy. But instead, he became cruel. You could have chosen differently, I whispered. He looked down quietly. Yes. Silence filled the room. Heavy silence. Then he asked softly, are you going to sell the mansion? I looked around slowly. At the giant library, the old portraits, the walls filled with painful memories. And suddenly I realized something important. This house was never the prize. freedom was. No, I replied calmly. His eyes lifted toward me. I'm turning it into something else. I smiled faintly through tears. A foundation. He frowned slightly. For who? I swallowed carefully. For young women abandoned by their families. The silence that followed felt enormous. Because finally, I was turning pain into purpose. My father looked away slowly. And for the first time in my life, I think he understood exactly who I had become. Not weak, not broken, not the family failure, but someone stronger than all of them. Months later, the mansion no longer felt cold. The giant empty rooms transformed into offices, classrooms, libraries, and safe spaces for girls who had nowhere else to go. Laughter slowly replaced silence. Warmth replaced fear. And somehow, healing replaced shame. One afternoon, I stood alone in the garden where my grandfather once read books beside me as a child. The sunset painted the sky gold while soft wind moved through the trees. And for the first time in years, I felt peaceful, not because I won, but because I survived without becoming cruel. That was the real victory. People think revenge means destroying those who hurt you. But sometimes, the greatest revenge is refusing to become like them. My father lost his empire. Daniel lost his illusion. My mother lost the comfort of silence. And me? I finally lost the belief that I was unworthy of love. And honestly, that saved my life more than money ever could. Because in the end, the family failure became the only person strong enough to rebuild what everyone else destroyed.